Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and Lauren streamer, and today we're going to be having a little bit of discourse on what is spicy fiction, um, the proliferation of spicy fiction. We have a couple of articles that I'm going to use to sort of guide the discussion, but for one, spicy fiction has proliferated a lot of genres, specifically just pilfering in every genre because the romance slash erotica genres are so full of content that there's so much competition. In my opinion, it started to try to find other ways to get into other genres where there are less competition, where there is less competition, so that they can boost up. Because let me tell you, of all the things, romance authors and romance slash erotica authors and readers are a very passionate bunch, and so they dominate. They are the most successful indie market that there is, and it dominates. No question asked there. But I have a problem with some things, as a non prefer of spicy fiction. And that's not even to say stories can't have sex in them, stories can't have graphic sex in them. There is a difference between a sex scene and smut. Smut is for the titillation, it doesn't push the story forward. We're going to get into that, but this isn't a video that is against writing sex scenes or even against writing smut. What I want from anything is honesty, because the biggest issue that I currently have and have had for a couple of years now is, one, how smut writers try to hide what they're writing and try to trick other people into reading it, or two, they try to guilt you. And I feel like that's a counter. I'm going to try to be as fair as possible here. And I'm not going to promise that it's going to come off as fair, because I still have my opinions. But I feel like some of the aggression towards verbalizing things, towards the discussion in general, is because of a feeling of being attacked. And so some people are going on the offense in the other direction, and it comes down to the words like clean. I've talked about this before on the channel when talking about a previous hashtag on Twitter that was run by a teenager saying she wanted to read more clean fiction and start a group for clean fiction suggestions, and a bunch of adults who write smut all got mad at this person, mad at this hashtag, and then couldn't get over sex being referred to as dirty. It just, there are some hangups with some people on the difference between clean and dirty. No, it is not a moral line. Just understand that. And if you're taking the subject of clean fiction as a moral definer, that if you have sex, then you are now therefore dirty, that is a you hang up. But that is you trying to change the way that fiction has been called for decades, for longer. I've got old pulp magazines that say clean on them. And so it's not a moral decision, demarker on it or anything, but that comes into the discourse. And then it comes into telling people how to mark the genres that they don't even read. And so it's a lot. But we're going to get into this and the idea of this sex and fiction and a couple of different conversations. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. The second thing is, if you would like to be featured on the channel, the links are down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lemoy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt. You write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creative genius. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit it to the Fresh Meat feature, that first chapter will be read here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work. There is a third way coming up for being featured on the channel, and that is with the third annual cringe stream, where you just interpret cringe however you like, and on the final Friday loin stream of the month, we read viewer written cringe, and then we vote on the cringiest, our favorite cringe story. It doesn't have to be actually the cringiest, we just vote on our favorite cringe story. So there is that. It is all anonymous, so you can't share that you wrote what story until after the vote happens, to try to make sure that the vote remains as clear as possible. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books, including the local library upon request. My newest novel, Body More Zero, came out at the end of October. It features these two gentlemen right here. And I am now working on my next project, which is a collaboration for the series The Legend of Bill Cassidy. The individual books do not have names yet. We'll get there. With that said, let's jump into the topic. And again, before we get into this is no shade on anybody that likes spicy books, that reads spicy books, that enjoys the taste of spice on their tacos, whether it is figuratively, literally, metaphorically. This is just there. I also am not trying to generalize people, because I think that there are different reasons why individuals hide what they are writing as spice. I think in one case it is marketing. It is entirely marketing, because if you look at indie writers especially, there are a lot of tricks behind the scenes that are used and shared between people that are just trying to get to the top of the charts to get bestseller, and they're like cheat codes to try to get there. And that is, make a book that is a train romance and then put it in trains and planes and whatever category on Amazon. So then if you even sell like 3 copies, then you're #1 bestseller, and you could put that in there for this obscure category that doesn't even really fit your book, but you got there. So there's that. There are the people that want to be discreet, because there's always a level of discreetness with some people when it comes to spicy things. There is the part of the spicy enjoyers who get off on exposing people to things without them knowing that it's coming. Don't try to tell me that doesn't exist, because that is a specific kink. There are those that just don't care and will put it on anything. There are people, I think, that only read spice, so they don't really get the difference between the genres, since what they really read is spice. And then there are those that also mislabel things or hide the spice with the intent of getting back at people they feel like have judged them, or wanting to hurt people who have judged them. Like somebody goes, hey, I don't want to read spice for whatever reason. The person's like, I'm going to get you to freaking read spice if it's the last thing I do, and I'm going to keep making it more and more extreme to trick you into reading extreme content. That does happen. In the same way, somebody goes, I'm going to try to trick this vegan or this vegetarian into eating meat by telling them this meat is non-meat. It's rude. It's just rude, and it's aggressive. But this topic specifically came up because I found this article, which I want to use to push us in. It's from a Substack, and it is called Shelf Love, Romance Novel Discourse. Why spicy books? Do you know what I mean? And I have never run across anything that has not known what spicy books mean. And the terminology for spicy books, I think, has changed slightly over and over and over again to hide what is being talked about. But spicy has been pretty consistent as far as I've been concerned. I mean, I've even got these pulp covers here where spicy was used back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s with these pulp novels or pulp magazines. And there was even Spice magazine, which was literally just spicy stories, as opposed to, here's spicy adventure and spicy detective that includes sexual obviously include more sex in them, because the covers constantly have women in their underwear that is being torn off. But questions for you guys is, have you ever been confused about what spicy means? Because for me, I assume that spice is meaning sex specifically. And so then that's where you get the heat levels of the spice. Is the higher the heat level, the more explicit sex is in there. And so a low heat level might mean a fade to black, or it could mean very few sex scenes that are also very vague. Whereas maybe a 3 and up is going to show very descriptive sex scenes, and lots of them with the more numbers you get in that spicy category. And so in saying that, I haven't ever thought that the term, what does spicy mean, even was a problem. So getting into the first article here from Shelf Love, we can likely thank social media censorship for the term spicy books. I also hate that, okay? This just means that people are trying to break TOS in general to keep using a platform despite breaking the platform's rules. You also just see it in the way people change how they talk when they say grape, or when they say self-delete or other things, when a lot of the time there's still not actually an issue with using those things. It's the manner in which they are used, not a specific only term of them, I guess, because I've never run into that issue, and I've got some questionable books on this channel. The only thing that I've ever gotten in trouble for on social media, I don't expect all of my videos to be fully monetized when I just quote specifically from the books, but the only thing that I've ever actually had censored, which was deleted in the last couple of years on social media, was when I jokingly told somebody they needed to cut off their leg because they were stuck wearing a cast. And that was on Twitter. And my account got banned for like 12 hours. And I was forced to delete a joke, but okay. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Twitter use secretive algorithms and filters and occasionally stated policies in terms of service to influence what we talk about, but it really just ends up shaping how we talk about them. For example, content creators will replace sex with segs in captions on Instagram or TikTok to prevent their content from being suppressed, or replace words for emojis, hello, eggplant, or replace letters with symbols. Clock app for TikTok, panini for pandemic, unalive for kill, boobs for boobs, and corn for porn. Ever wonder why dark romance promotions are riddled with misspellings, emojis, euphemisms, and intentional malpromisms? Well, I figure that just because that's how their books are written. And then it's got this picture here that says, when I'm in heat and he refuses to rut me under those circumstances because I'm a Virginia. Wait, you think I'm a Virginia? His expression changes. Fangs peek out from his mouth and claws tear holes in the metal grate that he's gripping. Part of me wonders if this Substack will get suppressed by your email service or in Google search, which I opposite of love. A 2022 article at Washington Post calls this internet algo speak and notes that getting around moderators in a tradition is a tradition as old as the internet, and heck, even predates the internet. After all, oh my goodness is just a way to say oh my god without angering parents of religious figures who forbade using the Lord's name in vain. Our speech has always been moderated by powerful forces in the communities in which we live. It leads to collateral damage of literal speech, attempting to regulate human speech at a scale of billions of peoples in dozens of different languages, and trying to contend with things such as humor, sarcasm, local context, and slang can't be done by simply downranking certain words. Evan Greer argues, internet algo speak is changing our language in real time from nip-nops to la dollar beans by Taylor Lorenz at Washington Post. Like, it's literally a problem that when leveraging the awesome power of the internet to broadcast messages that we can't just say what we mean. There's a lot to talk about in this topic. This article above discusses how discussing violence against marginalized people or even sharing health education involving body parts creates issues when creators have to use ridiculous and vague words to even have a chance at getting their message out. My beat is romance novels though, so today I'm going to focus on this algo speak and how it's impacting romance novel discourse instead and inside of and outside of the community. Have you noticed people online and in real life calling romance novels spicy books? Perhaps you've noticed the discourse increasingly talking about spice level or using the hot pepper emoji to discuss steam level. For example, a book may be a 1 chili pepper or it may be 5 chili peppers, a fire, and somebody with a red hot face. Look, I don't ever associate spicy books with romance novels because I don't associate romance novels with being the point of the characters climaxing. Like, a romance novel is generally going to focus on, yeah, the relationship and the characters getting together is going to be the ending. But a spicy book has to do with a lot of sexually charged everything together, and the climax is the climax. Like, at the end of a spicy book, you don't just have the characters not have sex. Like, they have to have explicit sex. So it's not romance novels, it's erotica. And personally, this is my judgment, and I'm letting you know that right now. I think people use spicy books because they feel like they get less judgment if they say spicy as opposed to saying they read erotica or literary pornography. Like, it's a euphemism to distance it from what it is. In the old days, we used to be able to talk about how sexy books were, but in algo terms, the issue in using sexy is that the word contains sex. Sooner than you could sing, "Let's not talk about sex, baby," creators learned that sexy was out and spicy was subbed in. Using Google Trends, we can see in the past 5 years, the term sexy books has remained fairly stable as a web search term. However, spicy books and smut books have risen from significantly less usage prior to 2021 compared with today to being significantly more popular than sexy books in 2024, following a similar trajectory with the term book talk. According to Google Trends web search, spicy books as a term is the most popular it's been, with sexy books is used only 18% as frequently in comparison. My hypothesis is that the greater usage of spicy books on TikTok, Instagram, etc. started bleeding into the lexicon of those platform users, which then started to impact other behaviors, such as how they search for information on Google. Spicy books are in the eye of the beholder. This is where I take issue with this author, with this article, where it is saying whether something is spicy or not is subjective, which if you can't have an objective measure of what is spicy, then you're going to end up recommending spicy stuff to people that don't want spicy stuff, because you're going to have different levels of it, and people are not going to be showing that they are compassionate or empathetic or understanding of people who do not want to read erotica. And that's really what this comes down to, is an inability or an unwillingness to understand somebody else's preferences. And as somebody who does take recommendations or accepts people's asking me to read their books, I am very honest about what my preferences are. And because I don't want to give somebody a bad time because I gave them a bad review. And it happens a lot more than you would probably think, because I gave them a bad review. And by letting people know what my preferences are, that theoretically should help people know that they should not send me their book, because I'm probably not going to like it, and I am going to be honest to the best of my abilities. More often than not, I get so many people that say, I know that you said you don't like this, but mine is different. It happens more often than you would think. And so you have to have objective standards of what things mean, because if you don't, then none of it matters. You can't give a recommendation to somebody if you can't define what something is. The issue I have with the term spicy books is that it doesn't actually seem to mean anything. To be fair, the term sexy book has the same issue if used as a descriptor. What an individual considers sexy is subjective after all. Again, I think that we should be able to understand that sexy book means erotica. Smut literally means erotica. Spicy, if you put spicy books and smut together, if those were search terms going together, you're talking about erotica. You're talking about literary pornography. This is subjective. And spicy books, I don't think actually is subjective. Let's take a poll in the comments down below, okay? Because maybe we'll learn just how subjective the idea of spicy books is. Anybody watching this, what do you consider spicy books to mean? When somebody says they're reading a spicy book, what do you think that is? Because now we need to crowdsource this. When spicy book starts to stand in for all romance novels, the descriptor of spicy becomes meaningless. It also creates a massive misunderstanding about what a romance novel is for readers and non-readers alike. For non-readers of romance novels, they may assume that the broad term spicy book to signify romance novel indicates that the genre, by definition, requires that a book be sexy. This isn't the case, and flattens the genre into a stereotype that romance readers have been chafing at for decades, if not centuries. Again, I don't see spicy as ever being romance. It is the subgenre, which is erotica, not a romance novel, because a romance novel does not need to have any spice in it. It reminds me of how grating it is when all romance novels from the 1980s are called bodice rippers, not because I don't love bodice rippers, but because bodice rippers are one very specific type of romance novel, and there are many more romance novels, even from the 1980s, that are not bodice rippers. For readers of romance, spicy book flattens our ability to have meaningful conversation about an aspect of romance novels that are helpful for finding books that we individually want to read. It impairs our ability to communicate information clearly, and that's weird, because the romance community loves creating and debating the meaning of in-community lingo. Yeah, and then everybody else outside of the community gets to be confused. Forming and debating in-community language to define the nuances of the books that we read is a time-honored pastime for romance readers, and I imagine that this is similar for other types of fan communities. Genres seek categorization when describing their whole or their parts. Think romance versus women's fiction, a general classification, enemies to lovers versus friends to lovers, tropes, and cinnamon roll versus himbo archetypes. Genres are, by their very nature, the result of artificially created and enforced boundaries that, let's not say boundaries, it's expectations. If a reader goes, I want to read a fantasy novel, I want to read a romance novel, it's not a enforced boundary, it's a genre expectation. And the categories serve to create a shared language and understanding that enables communications. For example, nothing gets romance readers more heated than debating the heat ratings, that is, trying to create a scale of sexual explicitness in romance novels. It's just too subjective to even nail down. However, I think that there is much to be gained by having the conversation. In the process, individuals need to provide examples to contextualize chosen words or categories. For example, All About Romance has been reviewing romance for decades decades and has a sensuality rating system with definitions. You may not agree with this, but at least there is an attempt to articulate the difference between warm and hot. Warm, moderately explicit sensuality, physical details are described but are not graphically depicted. Much is left to the reader's imagination. Hot, more explicit sensuality, sex is described in more graphic terms. Hot books typically have more sex scenes or are likely to depict acts beyond intercourse. Using the above excerpt's definitions, two romance readers could have a productive discussion that they make the case for a book being warm versus hot. Closed reading could provide evidence of making the case for one or the other. Something with this also, if we're going to talk about the definition of words specifically, is you have to go in knowing that certain people have definitions, and so then you should be willing to offer up what your definition is if you're going to be recommending things. I try to say this in as much as possible because knowing what people's boundaries are or preferences are and accepting or knowing how people define things is a great way to get onto good terms where you can trust each other. But if somebody says, hey, this is what I like and this is the definition of that, and then you continually challenge them on that or don't even accept that that's what they said, then you're going to end up with a damaged relationship and probably no trust. I can't tell you how many times I've said I don't like general fantasy, and I've had to repackage how I describe it almost every single time because of somebody who loves fantasy trying to tell me that their version of fantasy is going to be one that I love, even though it falls into the category of the fantasy I just don't have interest in. But they want me to describe what I think fantasy is specifically so they can say, but mine's different. 9 times out of 10, it's not. I'm sorry. Should words mean things? Why does specificity with words, particularly those that seek to categorize things, matter? Those with firsthand experience with the romance genre and some sense of its breadth have traditionally acknowledged that there is a difference between romance novels and erotica and between erotica and pornography. I appreciate discussing and understanding the distinction because they help me understand the differentiating characteristics and, even more importantly, how those characteristics impact how the genres are received and used by consumers. It also tells you, the specific words also tell you what you can expect with the storytelling. If something is erotica or considered a spicy book, then I'm going to consider that it's likely the world building doesn't matter, the characters don't matter, the characters will be treated as tools, the narrative is usually going to be thirsty after the other person. There is usually a lot more focus on descriptions that are going to be sexually charged, like talking about pointy nipples. There's going to be more focus on really random aspects of description that is specifically going to be sexual. And there are going to be more insults or provocations that are specifically about taunting someone sexually, like sexual harassment, but it's used as flirting. Constantly, that is the case. I'm also going to assume, generally, if it's a spicy book or erotica, that the main plot is going to be centered around keeping these characters apart so they can finally have sex later in the story. And so you're going to have forced sexual tension, made up reasons for why the characters can't get together. And the choices don't matter. Like, everything kind of just works because it's a fantasy that is there to just build, to just kind of edge until the climax at the end, which is their climax, which is your climax. Now, it's not to say there won't be other things throughout that let a climax happen, but it's not the climax, you know? So these words matter because it tells you what to expect of the story. When somebody says a sci-fi novel, there is expectation. When somebody says a horror novel, there's expectation. When somebody says a mystery novel, there's expectation. Same thing with erotica and romance. But it's so weird to me that it feels like the only, and maybe it's just, you know, my perspective from my closed perspective that I have, but it feels like it's the erotica and spicy book people that try to hide that genre more often than, like, mystery writers don't try to hide that what they're writing is a murder mystery. Thriller writers don't really try to hide what they're writing is a thriller mystery or a, you know, domestic thriller or a political thriller or any of that. But erotica will hide in fantasy, in sci-fi, in horror. And that's not even covering the fetishistic stuff. Nonetheless, these classifications do mean something, and there are practical uses. Let me return to the term spicy books, which I believe is standing in for romance novels in current discourse. If one discusses spicy books vaguely because they're not actually allowed to say what they mean, and then everyone starts repeating the word without it having a clear meaning, then we are looking at simulacra of the third order. The phrase is a copy of a copy of a copy with no original. The difference between a spicy book and a spicy book is meaningless. There is no difference between reality and representation. Spicy book flattens an entire genre purported to mean something while meaning nothing at all. Books with too gauzily described sex scenes are spicy books, along with ones where the characters kiss at the end, and others where the exchange of bodily fluids is creative, pervasive, and narrated by explicit dirty talk, as well as books that aren't romance novels at all. I have to wonder how much of an issue this is in the romance community, since I'm not in the romance community. I more often run into people who don't really understand boundaries, and that boundary is the sexually explicit, fetishistic material being recommended without mention. So that's something that I'm also interested in, is how often is a book recommended to somebody and they say they're looking for a spicy book, and then somebody who doesn't read spicy books recommends them a book that doesn't have any sex scenes in it because they thought spicy just meant something vague. Because since I'm not in this community, I don't know. I would argue that the squishiness of terms allows alarmist bad actors to evoke the most exaggerated or extreme specters of a thing to characterize a broad swath of content, from the blatant unobjectionable up to the content that could reasonably warrant discussion before being exposed to certain audiences. The dissolution of meaning enables a straight line to alarmist headlines that conflate spicy adult fiction with erotica titles that are corrupting children. And here we have a reference to, I think it's a Guardian article. It says, children exposed to spicy adult fiction by book talk influencers, which is something that I think needs to be talked about more, is how often these adults are in children's spaces, in teen spaces, and talking about sex or these sex books with these explicit things. Because in any other case, when you've got like a 22-year-old talking to a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old about sex, it's considered not good. It's considered grooming at the very least, but it's generally considered inappropriate. However, in this case, it's not. That is something that I would prefer to have more people talk on, because somehow this constantly suggesting, these older adult women suggesting adult books that if we're turned into movies, kids wouldn't be able to see on their own to these minors. Somehow it's going completely under the radar. And that's nothing against sex. We're talking about what is or is not appropriate for an age group to consent to. And again, if it was any other person, if it was a man talking to somebody in a chat room saying, hey, read this sexual book, it would not be considered appropriate. So why does this get overlooked as much as it does? In the image above, the TikTok creator is holding The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I'm happy for anyone who enjoyed the sex scenes in this book, but filing this book under the literary subhead erotic is gross mischaracterization. Guardian writers are responsible for their own shoddy reporting, of course, but these misunderstandings in meaning proliferate when The Love Hypothesis is lumped under the same hashtag as Delta of Venus. In this way, Spicy Books doesn't just stand in for all romance novels, it also starts to include erotic titles, and bad actors can further distort meanings by evoking pornography, which is often regulated by government with minimal age restrictions, such as requiring consumers to be a legal adult. So this is complaining about calling things with sex scenes in it pornography when it is pornography. It also starts to include erotic titles with pornography. Written works, usually fiction dealing with sexual love, erotica. Sexually explicit videos, photographs, writings, and the like, whose purpose is to elicit sexual arousal. Sexually explicit arts, photographs, sculptures, and the like depicting human sexuality. They're the same thing. If that's the starting place, then we can't have a discussion there, because we're just defining things so totally different, it doesn't even matter. Like, you can do your thing, but I do think that there is a discussion to be had of using rhetoric to get around that you are talking to minors about sex and suggesting adult material to minors. The direct result of this is imposing overzealous and badly informed restrictions on assessing content. As an example from the above Guardian article, quote, on the Waterstones online listing of Icebreaker, the first in Grace Maple Hill's series, the first review is by one of the shop's booksellers and says that the novel is a spicy romance for readers 18+. In this example, we see that the romance novel being implicitly categorized as pornography as indicated by the reader's 18+. Note, Icebreakers may include sexually explicit content, but that doesn't make it pornography. Yet this slippage seems closely related to the imprecise applications and understandings of the term spicy books. But see, then that turns into the question of the boundaries and what understanding people have of, again, well, and she said the same thing, what is spice? And if you can't describe explicit sex scenes as spice and say, hey, I prefer less spice or no spice, which would be explicit sex scenes, and do the difference of a book that has spice versus a spicy book. I don't know. I feel like it's getting too much into the rhetoric to just kind of dance around what it is. But let me know what your thoughts are. Look, the pearl clutching around the children consuming romance isn't anything new. It would be exhausting to even attempt to trace it back or detail notable instances from the last decade. I'm not blaming TikTok or that one bookseller at Waterstones or even the author of the Guardian article. I'm just saying that spicy books doesn't mean anything. You know what I mean? That just sounds like rhetoric of attempting to. I don't like how this ends. It doesn't give its definition of what spicy books should mean. It just gets mad at people trying to say maybe children and minors shouldn't be recommended adult novels that are full of gratuitous sex, especially on the internet where nobody is watching them. There are people taking advantage of children all the time. I just watched a video that was about a guy who was using Snapchat to get naked pictures of like 10 to 15-year-olds by tricking them that he was also a 15-year-old and then sending them some other little girl's nudes so that that little girl would send them the nudes, and then he'd be like, hey, I got your nudes, so now I need you to do whatever I want you to do. And then he would start making them masturbate. He would make them use the bathroom on the screen. He would make them go and get their little siblings and sexually abuse their siblings on video. People misuse social media and the naivety and lack of understanding of children all the time. And people like this want to go, oh, you're clutching pearls at the children, while not acknowledging how children are abused and misled and groomed, whether it's for this person to use them or just erasing those boundaries so that when somebody else comes along, that someone else can be their next dark boyfriend or whatever. And I don't like that this tries to hide the fact of what it is. That's where my problem starts with the whole spicy book conversation. And another issue that I have with the spicy book conversation is that it starts coming into our clean romance readers being judged for what they read. My thoughts on spicy romance readers. And there's a part of this specifically with the clean romance where you start looking at the people that read spicy fiction or erotica and they get mad at the term clean because then they say that is a moral judgment. That means that they are dirty, that sex is dirty, where technically sex is dirty. It's full of fluids. Sometimes you get a dipstick. Sometimes you get all sorts of fluids around. But to take it and put on a meaning so that you can take it as a personal insult when it is just a category for reading books, I think speaks to another level. I think it speaks to a personal guilt and an inability to understand what other people are looking at, what other people are looking for. Free to look at your spicy books, but to try to control what clean is and what clean means when you don't even read clean because now you feel guilty because you're not reading the clean books and you feel like that is a judgment of you, that's a you problem. And I have a problem with that. The other day, I was scrolling through my Instagram feed as usual. My algorithm is full of book-related content, and I came across a video that at first I thought was pretty funny, but on closer inspection, it got me speculating. The video was a short, pantomimed skit set to the music of one woman playing multiple characters. It showcased a scenario of other readers recommending the latest popular book to a clean reader. The clean reader declines the book, saying, no thanks, I don't like spicy books. And then while other characters, Book Talk, Instagram, and Library Janitor looked on, spicy reader began attacking the clean reader with said popular book. In short, this video was depicting the supposed judgment that this person faces for not wanting to read books containing explicit sexual scenes. At first, this might seem like it was made in good humor, as it was certainly heavily exaggerated. But the more I watched the video, the more confused I became. Since when is somebody judged for not wanting to consume sexually explicit content? She says this. And if you look back in my library of videos here, I actually did a video on this of people attacking somebody for preferring clean fiction or preferring non-sexually explicit fiction. And I do think that in part, some of it is this response to having been attacked or suppressed in the past for reading spicy fiction. And so now it's going the other way of attacking instead of being understanding of what that means. And that's my attempt at trying to show grace and understanding on both sides is if you were attacked in the past for your reading preferences, I understand lashing back, but that is what it's doing. And it's not fair. You're doing it on somebody who didn't even wrong you. Now I get it. It seems like at every turn, there is a constant there's content and product advertised that are sexually suggestive in nature. There is no doubt that sex sells, and it's heavily used in marketing and popular media. Everything from high budget films to song lyrics to perfume ads seem to be dripping in sex appeal, and I can understand feeling the need to step away from all of that and escape into a book. Wait, the books have sex in them too? Well, yes, some particular romance novels by some particular authors contain some rather graphically descriptive scenes of two or more consenting adults consummating, and sometimes teenagers, their physical relationship. Let's look at Paper Princess, as many adults who fall in love tend to do. Let me reiterate that I completely understand not wanting to be bombarded with sexually explicit content when you just want to escape in a book. Sometimes you're not in the right mood and just wants to focus on other things, or maybe reading content of a sexual nature makes you uncomfortable in general. That's more than valid. Read what you want. There's also this idea that, maybe, just maybe, the person doesn't care for reading about sex. Sex rarely pushes the story forward. A long, explicit sex scene rarely pushes the story forward, and that's very different than this idea of a book having sex in it. A sex scene is not explicit sex. And it also makes me think of when I talked about Brandon Sanderson some time ago, when people were complaining that he doesn't put sex in his books, but he apparently does have sex mentioned in his books. He just doesn't write out sex scenes. But since I never read Brandon Sanderson, I had no idea until I asked Brandon Sanderson fans, and they're like, yeah, he just does Fade to Black. But there are scenes in his book that are sex scenes where it shows that characters, especially married characters, getting together. So then this becomes it doesn't count as sex being in the book unless there's an explicit sex scene, and that becomes a different thing. I'm just not sure where this idea that people who don't want to read sexually graphic books are being judged for it. Girl, where? Pretty sure nobody cares that you don't want to consume spice. I have been judged for mentioning it before. I have been judged multiple times on multiple videos for putting out the idea in general of just not preferring it. And I know that there is judgment that goes both ways. That's what I am actually acknowledging here. From where I stand, the real judgment has always been the other way around. This person can't acknowledge that other people get it. Bro, I've been called a bigot before. I've been called a Puritan multiple times before for just having a preference against not sex. I have had people trying to peer pressure me into enjoying sexual books or trying to trick me into reading sexual content that I specifically said I didn't want to read. When someone asks me what I read, there is a good chance that there will be pearl clutching when I describe my genre of choice. Though there's that too. I see it all the time. Oh my gosh. Puritan, pearl clutching. There was the chick, the author of The Butt Cracker. If you go onto her page, and she got offended that her reading group that does mystery books and thriller books did not have an interest in reading smut. But she wanted to force her smut books on them. Not everybody wants to read smut. And I'm sorry, that's not a judgment to say I don't want to read smut, but then they take it personally and try to force it on you and tell you that you're pearl clutching or you're a Puritan or you got some problem or you're asocial. You should be all into this. And it is. Like, I know that people who prefer sexual content have received judgment from others that are like, why are you so obviously reading pornography in public? Because somebody who watches, a guy who goes into the public library to use the computers there to watch pornography is going to be judged for that. You see somebody sitting on the bus with their phone out watching pornography, they're going to be judged for that. That typically is how it is. But it goes the other way with trying to push it on other people who just don't have a preference, especially when somebody says, I specifically don't like this. And then you have reading partners who go out of their way to try to expose you to extreme content because they want to see your reaction. They want you to read smut. I've seen that. I've been there. When someone asks what I read, let's see. I've been told that I don't read real books or that what I read is just smut, which, get over it. Look, everybody is going to be judged all the time for whatever reason they want. I've heard people say that books are not real books if they don't have dragons in them, because fantasy readers are also very enthusiastic. Okay, I feel like I keep seeing this issue all over the place where somebody is like, look, someone doesn't like me, somebody doesn't approve of the choices that I make, and that means that I am specifically put at a disadvantage. No, everybody is not going to like you. There's no scenario in the future where everyone will like you and agree with you. And that doesn't mean that you are at some disadvantage. It just means that it sucks. My comments are plenty full of people that disagree with me, dislike me, call me names in certain places. It just is what it is. And if you like smut, I can't imagine this type of judgment being given to clean readers, while the comment sections of the previously mentioned video was riddled with judgments that it wasn't aimed at clean romance. Okay, the fact that you can't imagine those types of judgments being aimed at clean readers means that you either lack empathy or you've never talked to any clean readers, because this is a straw man. Again, I have received those comments. I've received those comments even just from saying, hey, can characters just be platonic and have platonic friendships or relationships with their parents instead of wanting to have sex with them all the time? I have been told that that is anti-whatever, because you should just have it in everything. It's okay if you want to write explicit sex and things. Just be honest about it and understand that some people don't prefer that, and it's not a slight against you if you do prefer it. But let's get into the ways that she feels slighted. All I ever see recommended anymore is spice, and I hate it. In the comments, if anybody feels like we're talking about that, because I don't like to follow the book talk books that people see, because it seems like most of it is spice. And that's also one of the reasons why I kind of go, if you want to find books that are not spice adjacent, probably don't take recommendations from TikTok. People who only read spice has an out of control porn addiction. If you need a book to have sexually explicit content in it, then yeah, it probably is porn addiction. You can enjoy sexual content in general without it being porn addiction, but I think we need to have a discussion about how if you need a book to have sex in it in order to enjoy it, or it's worthless, which I have seen those videos, those people trashing books that do not have sexually explicit content in them, don't say it doesn't happen, might be a problem. But again, you can just disagree with me and we can just not talk, not be friends, because guess what? Our values are so far apart that it doesn't even matter. Just disagree with me. I am sick of seeing these books. Me too. I'm sick of opening a book and the only thing in there is thirst. I write spice free because it's gross. That's their prerogative. You're not oppressed because somebody thinks it's gross. Rise up, fellow clean readers. I've seen rise up, fellow smut readers. So are we gonna... Can we stop taking individual people's opinions as if it means that you are some sort of oppressed class? Well, I certainly felt a little called out in the comments section as someone who loves reading spicy books. I guess I had better get myself checked out. I mean, if you're going to put your opinions out there, then get ready to be judged. It's just part of making a public opinion, okay? There are also plenty of comments for team read what you want, and that was nice to see, but I still think that there's a bit of deception in the storytelling. Are non-spicy readers actually being judged, or is it projection? I find it very interesting. What I find very interesting is that there seems to have been a shift in romance marketing. Yes, the romance book genre has always been around, and books containing rather graphic love scenes are hardly new. However, I don't recall knowing about them when I was in high school or my early college days. And I think the rise in popularity of sexier romance books is due to two factors: the publication of 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James in 2011, the rise of social media. I would also say it has a lot to do with how so many people of the last 10 or 15 years were writing sexual fanfic, and they are now getting published for having written sexual fanfic. 50 Shades of Grey hit the bookshelves at the perfect time as social media was on the climb. It really is no wonder why the book series spread like wildfire, changing the romance book reading trends as we knew it. Suddenly, it became more socially acceptable to openly read and discuss romance with kinkier themes, and more spice got pushed into the forefront of the results. So it only stands to reason that once the door to discussion was open, we spice lovers came forth. We finally felt that there was no need to hide our reading choices anymore, and we were finally able to connect with like-minded readers and bask in all of the salacious goodness that makes the steamy romance genre. Of course, some people are not as excited with this shift in popularity with sexy books. No, some people seem genuinely upset about it. While I think that it's valid to not want to read certain books, nobody is actually making anyone read them. The problem is a lot of people who read this stuff and push this stuff are also not honest about the content of the story, so they can't really consent to it, if you know what I mean. Let me give another example that's not specifically a spicy book. Among the Hunted is a book I did a book review for on this channel. I initially found it because the author was under a bit of fire when her book came out, getting a bunch of bad reviews because a large element of that story was hidden from the synopsis. And that element was that the friend in the inciting incident was both murdered and raped. And that the entire story circles around how the Greek gods rape the nymphs to get high off the magic that they get when they're raping them. Okay, but the entire synopsis left out the rape. So people were getting surprised by the rape. And for me, I had to assume that it was left out, and it is an assumption, left out because more people would turn down the book if they knew the entire story revolved around raping nymphs, and every situation was going to come down to the main character possibly being raped. It's set up like 4 or 5 times throughout the first book. So the problem is not that spicy books exist. The problem is when you're hiding spicy books to get people to read spicy books when you know they don't want to read spicy books, and you name call them when they're reading spicy books. And it goes both ways, because there are the people that say pervert. I say the stuff is perverted. I'm sorry if you don't like that. I don't know how else to call it when you're reading a book that it just focuses on the clam. But I get called a Puritan, pearl clutcher, or whatever. So we just get to agree to disagree. My bottom line is just please be honest. I think that we can have less issues if people are honest about the content they're reading and are not as hostile at others. So I'm wondering, is anyone actually judging these clean readers, or are they just projecting their own feelings and claiming a moral high ground with a tale of persecution? Now that's projection. There are definitely people that judge the clean readers, and that itself is a judgment. The idea that fiction can even be clean is then used to say, oh, you think that you're better than me because you are reading clean. That's judgmental. And here it is. Can we stop using clean in the romance sphere? That's you being judgmental. You don't have to use clean. You don't have to like clean because you don't read clean. But saying that anybody who reads clean or does clean is somehow putting themselves on a moral high ground is you judging other people for their choices, in the same way that you don't want to be judged as dirty for reading spicy fiction. I honestly hate the term clean fiction, as it pushes the notion that other romances are dirty. The word clean has often been associated with pure and good, so one can't help but feel that there is an edge of superiority when someone uses it to describe what they read. Many people still describe romance with on-the-page sex scenes as smut or porn, while some romances can definitely be classified as erotica. These terms are still used to underestimate the value of these books when they have so much more to give. I'm sorry, Haunting Adeline does not have a lot to give. People love it, they can love it. Not a lot of value there for me. Yet we still feel the not so subtle jabs that the books we are reading are unclean. That's a you. That is you in your brain. Look, if I go out to eat and I feel like a disgusting fatty, nobody has said anything to me, nobody has looked at me any certain way. That is a me issue to assume that anybody is sitting there thinking that I am disgusting. Okay? If you have this emotional reaction to the word clean, that you feel like you are unclean for reading smut, that's a you issue. You have to just not care. Regardless of how far we've come, there's still this puritanical way of thinking that sex is dirty and anything associated with it, apart from creating children, is uncouth. This is, again, a judgment on anybody who doesn't read smut, or their assumption on who doesn't read smut. So they're saying, do not judge me for my smut reading. However, I'm going to judge you and call you puritanical if you do this. Many of us romance readers are trying to step away from this rigid mindset. No, you're a smut reader. You're not a romance reader. You're a smut reader. And create a genre of books that, in parts, depict women in healthy relationships where they are allowed to enjoy sex with enthusiasm. That is not Haunting Adeline. That is not what is taking off on Book Talk, which is mostly toxic men, toxic relationship. Freaking, do not even get me started with Parapatina in The Fourth Wing, specifically saying her kink is toxic men. Yeah, that's a healthy relationship. I fail to see how that can be thought of as dirty. This is not what the majority of the popular books are doing, though. So are clean readers being judged? Well, I can't speak for anyone else's personal experience. All I know is that I have never personally judged them. You just did. And that's the problem. While I may feel judged for what I read, I don't let it get me down. I read what brings me joy, and I think that's what everyone should do. And I don't think there needs to be a social media war between the different types of romance readers. There shouldn't be an us versus them. No, there shouldn't. You should just get to read smut, and they can read clean fiction, and you don't have to bother each other. Those demarkers tell you that you're not the same audience. Going over here to The Guardian really quickly, we have Lucy Knight talking about sex writing feels less cringe now. Are we entering a new era of erotic literature? So this again shows that there is actually a proliferation where some of these other ones go, is it really that new of a thing? It is actually bogging down in a lot of situations. Sexual liberation must mean freedom to enjoy sex on our terms, to say what we want, not what we are presumed or believe that we are expected to want, writes Gillian Anderson in the introduction to Want, a collection of essays about sexual fantasies she curated. It's not a new idea. In fact, Want is being marketed as an update of a similar title that came out in the 1973 Nancy Friday's My Secret Garden, but it's still clearly one that strikes a chord. Anderson's book, in which 174 women anonymously described their imagined sexual encounter, became an instant #1 bestseller when it came out last month. A lot of this particular book's success can be, of course, attributed to Anderson's fame as an actor and the fact that her own sexual fantasy appears anonymously in the collection. But there seems to be a renewed energy in sex writing everywhere, too. The Erotic Review relaunched as a print magazine earlier this year, while dating app Feld just published the first issue of the new literary magazine AFM, which interchangeably stands for a Feld magazine and a fucking magazine. I think we're living on the cusp of the change in the terms of general societal views on acceptable sexual behaviors and what's deemed normal, says Lucy Rober, editor of the Erotic Review. Though the publication has been going since 1995, it had been online only for 14 years until Rober, along with deputy editor Saskia Vogel and graphic designer company Studio Fifth, relaunched it as a biannual print title this year. The magazine that once counted Boris Johnson as the contributor now wants to include more diverse and inclusive explorations of desire, with the explicit aim of moving away from the male gaze. 80% of the contributors of Rober's second issue, which came out this month, are women, while 35% are LGBT. It's just a bit of a rebalance, Rober says. The reality is that the male heterosexual gaze has been so pervasive in writing for a very, very long time. Her only literary frameworks for desire when she was younger were the glib swagger of writers such as Henry Miller and Martin Amis, or books such as Jilly Cooper's Writers, which she says is filled with other issues, frankly. To move more breadth is really important for those figuring out where their own expressions of desires might fit into the world, Rober says, though stresses that she does want to publish all voices in the magazine. She is, however, still very interested in the heterosexual male writer's voice, suspecting that it's been slightly quieted by things like Me Too. The sort of assumption that Susan Sontag was challenged in 1967 in the pornographic imagination, Sontag argued that the literary canon needed to expand to include literature that was explicit, are really still there in some areas of literary publishing. Rober thinks there is a fear of peddling pornography, although in 2024 that accusation is a bit mad because society is completely saturated in porn. AFM is also wanting to challenge assumptions about sex writing, describing itself as a dating app for the curious. Feld has become the go-to app for exploring polyamory and kink, after member research revealed that a large proportion of Feld users had creative interests and professions. AFM was commissioned aiming to feature members in their own voices. Its co-editor, Maria Dimitov, says. So 50% of contributors in this last issue are app users, including acclaimed author of Water's Cure and Blue Ticket, Sophie McIntosh, whose piece was about the history of celibacy. She was always really appreciated the way that Feld has created a space, online and offline, where there's room for people to think and write about sex and intimacy in ways that feel radical and thoughtful, she says. She thinks one reason why writers and editors are so interested in exploring this very primal physical aspect of being alive at the moment could be a reaction against a world where technology can both isolate us and bring us together. Sex writing also feels, frankly, less cringe than it used to be years ago when it mainly felt like a territory for bad sex awards, McIntosh said. The Literary Review Prize, whose interestingly hasn't been awarded since the 2020 award was canceled, was set up in 1993 by Auberon Waugh for otherwise sound literary novels that contain unconvincingly perfunctory, embarrassingly, or redundant passages of a sexual nature. While the award is supposed to be funny, at least for those who aren't shortlisted, it's also incredibly limiting, Rober says. Its existence might put people off of writing sex altogether. The Erotic Review is considering starting a prize that is almost opposite, she says, celebrating really good writing from many different angles that explores what desire is. And there certainly seems to be an appetite for what Rober and her team are offering. They have printed more than 3 times the amount of copies of its second issue than they did the first, after the initial print run of that issue sold out in 5 weeks. And these new approaches to sex writing, there's a sense of empowerment in play, of the freedom of thinking outside of the scripts that socially have made up how we think of sex and desire for a long time, McIntosh says. It feels less heteronormative, more centered on discovery, community, more fun generally. So obviously there's a lot of opportunity now. Though I'm like, I have to compare it to free love that started happening in the 60s and the 70s, which I wasn't alive for, so I can't talk about that. I do know that there is a purity culture that people have responded to that I've talked about in previous videos, but this feels more like a middle-aged person's movement as opposed to a youth movement, which is going to take me to the last thing here from Newsweek. Gen Z's distaste for sex scenes sparks Hollywood censorship debate. Now, this isn't about, again, content being allowed to exist, content being out there, but I do think it matters the honesty going forward of what your book is about, what your movie is about, what it contains, so people can make informed decisions on what they want to be a part of, and not trying to force or coerce people into taking part in stuff they don't want to. And that includes not calling people Puritans if they don't want to read sexually explicit content, but also not going after people that like to read sexually explicit content. One of the difficult things that I end up with when I am talking about books on this channel, because I get into such detail and I talk specifically about the craft, but also just about what I like or what I don't like and how I interpret it, is that I can end up criticizing something that somebody else likes. And I'm not criticizing other people who like the things that I don't like. I don't want people to feel bad for liking things that I don't like. And there's no way for me to separate that and just me saying, I don't like this thing, if somebody else likes that thing that I don't. It's just a way I can only do so much to say what my preferences are, and hopefully not hurt anybody in the process. So going into this very quickly, the merits of sex scenes are being debated online, raising questions over censorship, consent, and being overly sensitive. I also don't think that it's fair to start going after people as overly sensitive if they just don't want to watch sexual scenes. I think that I don't understand how we get there. I don't understand how, especially when you're talking about sex positive stuff and people talking about consent and people talking about, hey, you should want to see so much stuff about consent specifically. And if somebody says, I don't want this, then it becomes coercive into, then you should want this. What are you, some sort of freak? After various people expressed their displeasure at being subjected to sex scenes and nudity in movies and TV shows, some blamed the Generation Z community for sparking a conversation that has enraged many. Gratuitous, awkward, and creepy are some of the words used by people speaking out online against such scenes. Directors and movie production company president Stefano De Frey told Newsweek that the incoming generation are more pro-censorship than previous ones. I wonder why it always has to be called censorship if somebody's just like, can we just not have gratuitous sex? It happens with books, it happens in video games, it happens in movies. If somebody's just like, I just want a story, not to watch a butt flexing as it goes into somebody else on a movie. Social media influencer Brittany Martinez wrote online that she hates nudity in TV shows. Acknowledging it's her unpopular opinion, she added, it never propels the story forward and it's uncomfortable when you're with your parents, boyfriend, or friends. That's true. Come on, it's true. Conservative talk radio host April Marie agreed with Martinez. I fast forwarded through those scenes. I just find them gratuitous. Don't get me started on how much of Bridgerton I skipped only to learn I missed an important plot line by doing so, she wrote. Movie critic Guy Lodge shared this interaction and sarcastically asked, are you saying that a sex scene did in fact propel the story forward? A recent New York Times opinion piece suggested that there is now a cultural apathy towards sex that is fueling negativity toward the online sex scene discourse. TEDx speaker and OnlyFans model Zahira Kelly Cabrera offered her take on this. She posted that the problem isn't with people watching, but with the circumstances in which they are filmed. IDK, sex scenes should be done by people who want to do it generally. It shouldn't be expected or forced or a creepy director's secret fetish, and I personally don't mind them, though for me, fast forwarding is a thing, because I don't care, but why ban? I don't think this is something that bothers me with these sorts of discourses too. Just because you say I don't prefer something or I would rather not have it doesn't mean that you are asking for a ban. You're just sharing your preference in the same way if somebody goes, I wish there was a sex scene in every chapter. It's your preference. And expressing that you just don't like something and wouldn't mind if it was gone, not a ban. But that feels in part as like specific inflammatory language, because people have this rabidness when it comes to banning that you can't even talk about things because they've thrown the word ban out. There's no ban on sex scenes. Nobody is asking for a ban on sex scenes. But if your consumers are like, I'm not really a fan of this, you can make decisions to not do it. In regards to the anti-sex scene movement with Gen Zers, it's critical opening the discussion with separating an artist's work line a film or television show from reality, DeFray told Newsweek. Gen Zers have had a very pro-censorship view regarding artists' work, particularly when it comes to sex scenes and erotic films, over the past 5 years. By contrast, that marks a very different perspective from every generation older than them in the past 70 years. You would have to wonder why. Also, again, what is the problem with somebody preferring not to be exposed to visual sex? Isn't this about consent? And somebody's just saying, I just don't like this. Doesn't need to be visually shamed for having a difference. Like that last one was, how are you sure that anybody is getting mocked for saying they like clean fiction? Yes. Because whenever anybody says anything about preferring not to have sexual content in their stories, it gets this sort of reaction that they're being ridiculous. DeFray also argued that Gen Zers would have fought to prohibit the release of a movie like Last Tango in Paris, which was heralded as a masterpiece in 1973. Controversially, this film contained a scene in which the lead actress was unaware that her co-star Marlon Brando and the director Bernardo Bertolucci had planned to film a sex scene. I felt humiliated, and to be honest, I felt a little raped, both by Marlon Brando and by the director, actress Maria Schneider told UK newspaper and the Daily Mail. Well, maybe they shouldn't have forced anybody to do a sex scene or trick them into doing it. DeFray added, Gen Zers tend to have a very challenging time differentiating between concepts of what is a permissible artistic expression versus reality. As an example of this, Gen Zers often justify and moralize their censorship views with the statement like, we shouldn't be doing this in real life, or this is not how we ought to behave in real life. The obstacle facing this generation is that films and art are not reality. This type of censorship leads to virtue signaling that hinders great art, which is the expression of our desires, sometimes even dark ones that may revolve around sex scenes, whether you wanted them or not. You know, having a preference of I don't want to see sex scenes is not a movement to ban anything. It's not an idea of censorship. It's a preference. Just because I don't tend to or go looking for or want to watch movies that have graphic rape on the screen does not mean I'm saying other people can't make those films. I'm just not going to watch them, and if I know a film contains a graphic rape scene in it, I'm likely not going to watch that film. In the same way that I don't tend to watch sex comedies from the 2000s because I don't tend to like sexual humor. People can do it. Me having a preference against it is not censorship, though. If I state my preference, it's hopefully to get recommendations that meet my preference and is not going to give me a bad time. While there are sex scene naysayers online, they appear to be heavily outweighed by people speaking out for them and their artistic merits too. Podcast producers and film critic Kate Young posted that she has no problem with the concept, even considering things that she was subjected to on the screen. Quote, I grew up watching women be raped every week on SVU, and I'm not trying to ban sex scenes. I'm perfectly capable of being repulsed by one and enticed by the other, Young wrote. But why does one person's defense get to supersede somebody else's experience? Because that's what's being done here, is fighting experience with experience. Author and psychiatrist Carol Lieberman told Newsweek that the discussion around removing sex scenes is indicative of the younger generation. They also have a fear of sex and are called the sexless generation. Sexual activity rates have been declining for years, and it is worse for Gen Z. She added that the fall of rate in sexual activity is a knock-on effect from the generation that came before. This is parallel to the rise in divorce rates for their parents. Seeing the heartbreak of divorce has made them fear intimacy, both emotional and sexual. I think that's a reach of a thing to make without studying it further, honestly. Studies have proven that Gen Zers are having less sex than those that came before them. The Love Honey Summer of Love survey from 2022 found that people aged 25 and under were less sexually active than adults in their late 20s, 30s, and 40s. Various academic studies found that those born in 1996 onwards are having less sex in what Vogue's dating columnist Annie Lord called a sex recession. But so, what's it matter? I mean, another option is being inundated with sex way too early, because you know what one symptom of sexual abuse or early sexual exposure is? Sexual repulsion. So I think that there is more going on here, but what I think in general, and it needs to be looked at, but it needs to not turn into insulting people for not doing things the way that you want to do them. Personally, I had fewer issues running into sexual content in stories until I felt like it proliferated everything that I went in, and I was actually getting porn level dialogue in there, which is like, yeah, you like my dripping cummy cock filling your pussy with my icing on the cake, don't ya, bitch? Like, if I'm running into that in random books that call themselves fantasy, that call themselves romance. I didn't used to have an issue with it until I was inundated with so much content. Now I'm like, I don't really want to see it. I'm fine with reading sex in books. I just don't prefer it. And I don't really want to read porn. And by porn, I'm talking about stuff that is written in a very specific way that they talk like it's porn, where the only thing that they notice all the time is how thirsty the other love interest makes them feel every time they're in the room. That's all that they notice. There is no plot. Anyway, I think there's more going on here. Do people get made fun of? Do people get picked on for liking sex in books? Yes. Do people get picked on for not liking sex in books? Yes. It goes both ways. I don't think either side of this equation is more or less oppressed than the other. Sex is everywhere. You can get away from freaking Carl's Jr. commercials without women in bikinis eating a burger with their legs spread. Come on. But I do think that there is a lack of empathy here in trying to understand the other person's perspective. And I know that it is very easy for me to end up offending people when I'm not even trying, just by stating my opinion, because I know that I have stated that I don't like heavy sexual content. And I know that there are people in my audience or that watch some of my videos that either enjoy heavy sexual content or they write heavy sexual content. And I'm glad that you do. I'm glad that you do what you are enjoying, but that doesn't mean that I can't be honest about what I think. And that's the pressure that I have felt, where it's like people want you to be honest, but then when you are honest, it is taken as a personal attack if it's different from what somebody else wants. And then you're told you need to change because you're the one with the problem, because it's different than what they believe. I don't know how to navigate having an opinion and not pissing other people off. So where do we go from here? I don't know. Other than it's not personal. That's all that I can say. Most opinions in general are not personal. And they only get personal when you target them at somebody. And that's just that. I don't know. There's no way to get around it. All you can do is try to find understanding with people who are willing to give you understanding. Try to understand other people. And that's it. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments below. I don't think that this is just a Gen Zer thing. I also don't like that this Newsweek article decided to pick on and insult Gen Z specifically. But you know, that's from me, and I've been called all sorts of names for my preferences, so whatever. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. With that said, have a great weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall, You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?